The San Francisco 49ers, for the seventh time in their franchise's history, are returning to the NFL's greatest stage. This Sunday afternoon, the Niners will take the field against the Chiefs of Kansas City in Super Bowl 54. Hi, this is Sam Lubman, producer of the Marc Guzman podcast experience, here today with our third special edition episode, this one commemorating this exciting Niners team. I chat with friend of the podcast, Chris DeBenedetti, who is also the sports columnist with the East Bay Express. Chris and I take a walk down memory lane and recapping previous 49ers trips to the NFL's mountaintop, as well as break down the strengths of the team, its players, and what to watch for with the Chiefs before this Sunday showdown. I'm going to start recording then. Alrighty, Chris, thanks for joining us on this special episode here as the San Francisco 49ers, the Bay Area's now only football team, is getting ready to go to its seventh Super Bowl to take on the Kansas City Chiefs. And Chris, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, Sam. How you doing?
I'm doing good. So before I get started, I just want to do a quick shout out to our podcast sponsor, East Brother Beer, located on Canal Street in Richmond. Great beer. Definitely recommend getting a taste of some if you got for all of our listeners here. So now, of course, Chris, I did want to keep this specifically about football today and the Niners. But of course, I think we can't overlook the tragedy that was with Kobe Bryant crashing with his daughter in a helicopter crash yesterday. I mean, what was your reaction to that? How did you find out? And what are your thoughts and memories on Kobe Bryant?
You know, I found out, I think like a lot of people found out, where I was just sort of thumbing through Twitter. Yesterday, I was kind of, working on some projects, even on a Sunday, and procrastinating and going through Twitter. And I was just shocked, like everybody else was. I think the idea that someone so wealthy and so young and so accomplished, and despite his some of his controversies over the years, so admired in most circles, the fact that they could be cut down at the age of 41, I think that's part of the shock, I was completely blown away when I saw it on Twitter, and I kind of had the same reaction others did. I didn't tweet about it, I didn't feel like I had anything really to say about it, or anything new to offer that more than what anybody else was, people that actually knew him. But I had the same reaction that people had, and they were sort of like, this has to be a hoax. And then after a few minutes, and other news agencies chimed in to verify, unfortunately, it was not a hoax, and it was a tragedy that it was, and will continue to be for the Bryant family and his remaining three daughters and his wife, and also the other families, the Altobelli family in Orange County. And I think there was another family, another person.
There was also, believe there was another family. Yeah, the another parent, Christina Mauser, who's actually, was a basketball coach, and then Sarah and Peyton Chester, who are mother and daughter. So yeah, it's any more information you read about it just gets harder and harder.
It's tragic all the way around.
Yeah,
so.
What was do you have any memories or a Kobe story or anything from your memories covering sports?
Kobe's heyday, of course, was really like the darkest pit of the Warriors' frustrations and failures. So it was always sort of being under his thumb, being under the Lakers' thumb from the Bay Area fans' perspective. But there's just no doubt that he's one of the greatest players of all time. If not for Michael Jordan, you could really argue that Kobe was the greatest of all time. But I think people had a good reaction yesterday where they were saying that, maybe we should just put aside those comparisons and just appreciate each of those guys, including LeBron James or Steph Curry or Kevin Durant or anybody that you think is the greatest player of all time. Just maybe we don't need to compare.
Maybe for the next week or so we set those aside.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember.
He was certainly in the conversation.
I remember growing up just thinking Kobe was the ultimate villain. He was that guy who he was just so good. He was just so in your face about how good he was. As like, I'm going to kick your ass, and you know it. I know it. Everybody knows it. And it just I'm not gonna lie, as a kid, I just hated him. But you
Right.
grow older and you start to understand. Wait a minute. I mean, yeah, the Warriors sucked, and that obviously played a part of it. But it's
Yeah.
just the ability to just take over games. He just had another level to go to late in the game that I just never saw from any other player. It was art watching him go, and
Yeah, he had that killer instinct, and I think what made him such a big villain for some people, was that Magic Johnson had that smile and he could really turn on the charm, and even people that didn't like the Lakers could acknowledge that Magic was a likable, great player. And the same thing with Michael Jordan; he had that side to him that he could really turn on, and Kobe didn't really kind of care about that. he wanted.
He always had that
ass.
kind of like grimacing scowl that he would give.
Yeah, he was not interested at all in not even in a perfunctory way of being charming or being your friend. Even though when you talk to people or you see interviews with people that were close to him, he certainly had that side. But he was definitely a great and tough player.
And you can see that impact that he had just beyond the sports world, just in how people yesterday and today, this Monday, the January 27th, when we're recording this episode, just the worldwide reaction. It's really something. So
yeah, you saw soccer players. I think it was Neymar in Spain.
well, and the NFL's probably going to do something for the game on Sunday to recognize them. So I mean,
Yeah.
it's incredible. So speaking of that game on Sunday, there is our only local football team now is going to be participating in it.
Yeah.
And just when the Niners punched their ticket to the Super Bowl, what was your initial thoughts and reactions?
You know what? I'm a recovering Oakland Raiders fan. You know what I mean? So I am, and I know that's probably not what Niner fans want to hear right now.
Honestly, I'm in that same boat. So
the similarities to 1981, as you mentioned before, are striking. Not just with the team, but you have the Raiders that left for LA, and that very next year the Niners had the Super Bowl winning season with a young. Charismatic quarterback and a young but an offensive mastermind coach, in Bill Walsh, and now they have that with Kyle Shanahan in a different way, but still there are similarities there, and Montana and Garoppolo have some similarities for sure, and you also have the similarity from if you're from the other side of the bay, you're like, my team is leaving me, and immediately the Niners grab the national and the Bay Area spotlight. With the Super Bowl team. So the similarities are striking in many, many ways.
It's kind of eerie in some sorts, really. I mean, it's you look at it. Yeah, that 81 team, they both Walsh and Shanahan were in their third years coaching the team. The previous 2 years, the 81 team had 8 wins. This team had 10 wins the previous 2 years. This is where I think it starts getting a little, eerie. Both Montana and Garoppolo had 24 starts for the Niners heading into the playoff run to their first Super Bowl.
Yeah,
and
that's.
Yeah.
Go ahead, sorry.
And the Niners, I mean, they ended up winning that Super Bowl that year behind a very potent rushing attack, which, if that sounds familiar, it should, because that's how they're doing it this year. So yeah, comparisons are pretty striking.
Yeah, and it's I mean, I don't want to get too crazy in the numerology, but it always kind of strikes me sometimes the coincidences in sports. I remember when the Red Sox, and I'm no Red Sox fan, but when they finally won their first World Series in 85 years, the two outfielders in right field and center field that were running in to celebrate, their numbers were 1918, which was, of course, the last year.
I did not know that.
Yeah, the last year that they had won previously. And then even last night, I think it was a Trae Young for Atlanta who was crying on the court before the game. Excuse me. He broke one of Kobe's records last night. And some of the numbers there, I think it was on 24 shots, which was, of course, 24 was his number. And it was on 81% free throw shooting. Kobe is, of course, known for
81 points.
Scoring 81 points in a game. Yeah. So there were we can go all day with.
Oh yeah, it's a rabbit hole. We could definitely spend an entire afternoon going down. So let's kind of go back more to this season. This season started, the big topic was all the way back on August 14th. Jimmy Garoppolo threw 5 interceptions on 5 straight snaps in practice. And I remember, listening to the game in KMBR in the week after that. You'd have thought that the apocalypse was descending on the Bay Area.
Right.
I mean,
right.
So going back to just our attitudes at the start of the season, how did your opinion and just your thoughts of this team evolve as the year went on? Because there weren't really much in the realm of expectations going back, starting at training camp.
Yeah, I mean, I think everything was a big question mark. Even though Garoppolo had come here 2 years ago in the middle of the 2017 season and had kind of turned around a really moribund season. The injuries last year had thrown everything into question. Would he be rusty? Would he be the same? Was that just a fluke in 2017? And you had that 4-12 record that you're coming off of, which few teams. It's been done a few times before, but very few teams have made that leap from 4-12 to a Super Bowl contender. And so I thought they would be good. I thought they might sneak into the playoffs. I thought they'd build on some of the stuff that they've been building on, but I did not think that they would be 13-3. I did not think they'd be a number 1 seed. I did not expect that defense to really just be a dominant defense, and I think that this is going to be the difference. We can talk about this maybe later in the show, but this defense to me, it just stands out, and they remind me of the Ray Lewis, Terrell Suggs defenses that the Baltimore Ravens had. Or even like the Tampa Bay defense when they had Derek Brooks and Rondé Barber and Warren Sapp, the Pittsburgh Steelers in the 70s. They remind me of the kind of defense where you look at them and you think, do they have 15 guys on the field? Because it sure looks that way. Like it looks like every play they dominate. Every play there's a pass rush on the quarterback, and when they don't just kind of torment the quarterback or stick a running back, you're kind of half surprised, which is rare in today's offense crazy NFL.
Yeah, for me, I look back at this season, I kind of consider just a few turning points that really stick out to me. And just how this season evolved. The first really is when Garoppolo hit Dante Pettis with 1:20 left in the fourth quarter to beat the Steelers in Week 3. That was right after, excuse me, that was right after that 2-week road trip to start the season, which even that, winning back-to-back games on the East Coast, that's pretty tough. But they're against bad teams, so it's like, whatever. Then they win that third game against the Steelers, like, all right, maybe this team could compete for a playoff spot. Then, you got that bye week, they crushed the Browns, and then they beat the Rams in L.A., and that's why I start to realize, okay, we might have something a little special here. And then when Garoppolo threw those 4 touchdowns against the Cardinals on Halloween night, that was a game where really no one on the Niners was playing well. That was a classic trap game. Niners hadn't won in Arizona since 2013, hadn't beaten the Cardinals since 2014. Yeah. And for him to rise up and carry the team to that win, which would have been a game that I don't think anyone would have. I think that was the game they got to 9-0, and no one would have faulted them for losing. But when they won that, it's like, all right, we got something real here, and this is going to be a real fun season. So obviously the Niners, they've been to the Super Bowl 7 times, which I believe has them tied with the. No, I think the Patriots still have the overall lead in Super Bowl appearances. Yeah. But yeah, they this Super Bowl history goes very far back, all the way to that 1981-82 season. What do you remember, I guess, from that first Super Bowl season? I know that was quite a while ago, so I'm asking you to search deep into the memory bank.
Well, I do remember the game that really set it off for that season, and I think it happened in early October. I forget the exact date. But the Cowboys came to Candlestick, and it was kind of a beautiful, sunny October day. And this Niner team had shown promise. They were looking pretty good, but not great. But the Cowboys, of course, were like the perennial contenders. Tom Landry, Danny White had just succeeded Roger Staubach, and they were picked by everyone to win it all that year. And Cowboys came, and I think the Niners beat them 45-14, and they just crushed them. There was I think Ronnie Lott had a big hit on one of the Cowboys, and the defense brought it back for a touchdown. They just killed him, and after that, there was really no looking back. It was just one of those dream seasons, and Montana just came out of the gate and really established himself as a star that year. I believe it was his third year in the league. He had succeeded Steve DeBerg, and so there's that. And they went 13-3 that year, and then of course who can forget the catch? That was the biggest moment probably in 49er history to this day. I was just they show documentaries about it all the time on ESPN and NFL Network. And what's really amazing about that game and that play, the catch, was really the drive that started it. And you had the Niners didn't have very very many good running backs. They had Ricky Patton. On that particular drive, they used a little used veteran named Lenville Elliott, and he just he didn't carve up the defense, but he got just enough yards whenever they turned to him.
Yeah, he had 48 yards rushing that day. Earl Cooper had 35. They were a couple years away from getting Roger Craig in that backfield.
Yeah, which makes what they did all the more impressive. They didn't have a star running back, a horse they could ride, so that's what I think of. And I also think of, too, people forget that the Cowboys got the ball back after the catch. And they completed a pass at midfield, I believe, to Drew Pearson, and he was going to be gone. And I believe it was Carlton Williamson or Lott just reached an arm out. And they might have called a horse collar tackle by today's rules, but brought him down. And then from there, the last second drive petered out. And then, of course, they go to the Super Bowl, and they really dominate the Cincinnati Bengals, who were favored. And people forget, Bill Walsh was such a master psychologist, not just an X's and O's guy, but he knew this was a young team going to their first Super Bowl. And when they got off the bus in Detroit, because it was played in Pontiac, Michigan that year in the Dome, he was dressed as a bellhop at their hotel, and it was just kind of his way of telling the team to relax and it's okay to joke around and have fun on this trip. And I remember those kind of images. A lot of people forget that you can really psych yourself out of a Super Bowl, particularly if you're a young team. And you can really crumble under the weight of the moment. And he was doing everything he could to inject fun into the experience for them. Even, I believe it was the first play of the game for them, or maybe the second or third, but it was that first drive, the first set of downs, they did a flea flicker to Charlie Young. And, I think he got 20 yards. It wasn't like a game-changing play or anything. But again, I think he was just trying to tell his team, relax, we're going to have fun today. And they did. They won.
Yeah, just a little fun now and then fact. You know how much a 30-second commercial cost in that first Niners Super Bowl 26?
I have no idea.
It was around $324,000 to get a 30-second commercial. Want to take a guess as to what it's at now?
I'm going to go low, but just $2 million?
No, you're a little low. $5.6 million for a 30-second commercial.
My goodness.
How the times have changed. So then let's fast forward to a couple years later. Super Bowl 29. Super Bowl 19. Let's get the numbers right. This was, you could probably consider, the only home Super Bowl win in NFL history, when the Niners beat the Dolphins, quarterbacked by Dan Marino, in that game that year, 38-16. And the roster was full of a lot more names, I think, that on that Niner team that people might recognize today. Yeah.
I mean, you had, of course, you had Montana and Clark, and you had, you still had Freddie Solomon. It was, this game is interesting because it reminds me the most of the game coming up this Sunday, in that you have Dan Marino, who was in his second year, and a lot of people thought the Dolphins might win this game just off of Marino's arm. And the reality was, not only did they lose to the Niners, but Marino never made it back. And I think it was a similar situation to Patrick Mahomes, even though he's a different type of quarterback. He's so athletic and just, like a perfect 21st century quarterback, in that he can pretty much do anything. But but it does remind me a little bit in that Mahomes is probably the greatest quarterback in the game today, and he's only been around for a couple of years, and it just I think you have a similar situation where the Niners defense in this situation is better than Kansas City's. And even though the quarterbacks will get all the focus, I think just like in Super Bowl 19, the Niners D will dominate Mahomes enough. The way that they dominated Marino. I mean, he didn't do much, 16 points. And he never got back.
I mean, the Niners more or less just kind of across the board dominated the Dolphins in that Super Bowl. But yeah, that's actually a very good point that I actually hadn't really considered, was that Marino Mahomes comparison, and it's just another where I've seen this theme where this year's game really just seems to be a mixture of all the past Super Bowls that the Niners have been in. But yeah, they really shut the Dolphins down there. And then, yeah, one of the things that really kind of keeps people from saying Dan Marino is one of the greats was because he never got back to that big game despite so many successful Dolphins teams in his career.
Yeah.
So then moving on to Super Bowl 23, you got a much closer game. This was one of the more notable games in Niners history, and I'm sure you'll be able to get to that story in a minute. Niners beat the Bengals 20-16, and Chris, I'm sure you remember the story from this game that everyone likes to talk about. So I'll let you tell it.
Well, I think what's interesting, before we get to that, is that as you mentioned here, when we were talking before the broadcast, that the Niners got the ball back with about 3 minutes left in the game on their own 8-yard line, and they only had 13 points at that point. This was not a high-scoring affair. It was 16-13. You had a great 49er offense with Jerry Rice and Montana and Roger Craig, and Willis is pulling all the gears, and the Bengals had still held them to 13. But sure enough, when they got in the huddle, Montana pointed out to everyone in the huddle. He said, "Isn't that John Candy?" Pointing to the actor who was in the stands. And I think that this was, we were talking about what Walsh did in Pontiac, Michigan, to calm everybody down and keep things loose. Montana apparently was doing the same, and he was kind of like Kenny Stabler. I hate to bring it back to the Raiders, but he was like Kenny Stabler in the sense that he was just so cool. And the hotter it got on the field and the situation, the cooler he got. And guys like that are just built to lead football teams, and they're built to win Super Bowls because they don't shrink from the moment; they rise to it. And sure enough, he did that. He led another drive, a 92-yard drive over 11 plays. Took about 2.5 minutes, and instead of going to Roger Craig or Jerry Rice, of course, he threw that famous slant. Montana did. To John Taylor against the Bengals secondary, and really for the second time in about 5 seasons, they crushed the Bengals. It was a different quarterback. It was Boomer Esiason, not Kenny Anderson as it was in Super Bowl 16, but this time it was Boomer Esiason and Sam Leitch again, the Walsh protege, as the head coach, and the Niners had won their 3rd Super Bowl in 8 seasons.
Yeah, and of course, I mean, I'm thinking it's like, do you think he actually saw John Candy, or I mean, how do you pick him out in the stands? I believe this was played in Miami, so at the Orange Bowl. So I'm very curious how you were able to be like, oh, hey, that's John Candy over there. But I mean, that's got to be some eye to have there in order to pick someone like that out of the crowd.
That's true, and the fact that he phrased it as a question.
Yeah,
he gave himself plausible deniability.
Yeah, no. So I wonder who Jimmy G will have to point out of the stands on Sunday at Harbuagh. So
probably like Nicki Minaj or something.
Yeah, someone.
It's Miami, J-Lo.
Or A-Rod, J-Lo. Oh God, if only not. So then the next year, the Niners did something that hadn't been done in the Bay Area since the A's back in the early '70s. They went back to back. And their first trip to the Superdome for the Super Bowl went fairly well, and they crushed the Broncos 55-10, which I believe is still the biggest blowout in Super Bowl history, despite the fact the Broncos tried to tie that against the Seahawks a few years ago. And that was George Seifert's first year. Bill Walsh had stepped down, then you got Seifert leading the team, and they just ran roughshod all over the Broncos in that game. That was it.
Yeah,
They held the Broncos to 167 total yards. It's just 55-10. That's an across the board embarrassment.
what's most impressive about that is that they did that to John Elway. I mean, it wasn't like sometimes teams sneak in, and you get a quarterback that isn't great. Like I think Tony Eason against the Bears in the mid '80s when he was the Patriots quarterback. I mean, sometimes you get a quarterback in there who's just sort of managing the game. They instead that wasn't the case. They had John Elway, Hall of Famer, one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time, and they still just dominated him. They still held them to 10 points, and 55-10. It didn't even feel that close. I remember they came down and scored. The Niners did on their very first drive, and you just felt the inevitability.
Like ball
of it.
game.
Yeah, and the Broncos must have felt it too because they just laid over. So,
interesting coaching staff though on that Broncos, especially on the defensive side. You got Wade Phillips was their defensive coordinator, and then Mike Nolan, the future Niners coach, was the linebackers coach for that Broncos team.
Yeah, there was the Broncos were no slouch, but the Niners were just such a machine at that point. And what Bill Walsh, I mean, I don't want to diminish what George Seifert did. He was a good coach in his own way, but I'm sure Bill Walsh had regretted stepping down because it just would have lent to his legacy to have matched Chuck Noll with that fourth Super Bowl. But he clearly had built something, this machine that was just continuing to roll at that point.
Now, do you recall at all, was it more when the Niners won that year with Seifert at the helm, was it more the thought of, Seifert definitely made this happen, or Seifert did this with Bill Walsh's hand-me-downs?
It was Seifert didn't screw this up at the time. Now, whether it's fair or not, I don't know. It's probably not fair, but because it's a lot of coaches take over talented teams and they don't go anywhere. So, it's to his credit that he was able to continue this success. But at the time, it was sort of like, great. He didn't screw this up. This thing that Walsh started and Eddie D had started. Good for George for kind of getting out of the way and letting them do their thing.
All right, so then a few years later, you got very, I don't want to say a totally new team, but you got a new quarterback in Steve Young, and him and George Seifert get back to the Super Bowl again, and they beat the Chargers 49-26 again in Miami. The Chargers general manager at the time, Bobby Beathard, who is the, I believe, grandfather of backup quarterback C.J. Beathard. When Young and Seifert won that game, what did that do for their overall resumes, the way people perceive them, to their legacies? I assume for Young that was definitely a big step out of Montana's shadow.
Yeah, I mean, I remember late in the game he was jokingly he was very aware of the Montana shadow and the frustrations that the fans had. It had been 5 years since that crushing of the Broncos. And what had happened in those 5 years is that the Niners continued to contend. They continued to be one of the best teams in football. But the Dallas Cowboys had thwarted them 2 years in a row before Super Bowl 29. That was the Jimmy Johnson teams with Troy Aikman and Emmitt Smith.
Michael Irvin. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, these guys are perfect villains, right? And at least from the Bay Area's perspective. And I knew many Niner fans who were just like it had become this big burden.
Oh, I'm sure you could get a lot of gags out of Niner fans just by naming any one of those guys on that team.
Yeah, and so really, I really felt like the Super Bowl 29 had been won, 2 weeks earlier when the Niners finally beat the Cowboys and had kind of thwarted their rivals, finally kind of cast them aside. And when you got to the Chargers in Super Bowl 29, it was similar to the Broncos in the sense that they were huge favorites. And unlike the Broncos team who had John
Niners
Elway,
were 18.5-point favorites going into that game.
It's crazy, and they covered. And the Chargers had Stan Humphries as their quarterback, and they had upset the Steelers in a last-second defensive stand 2 weeks earlier in Pittsburgh. So they were kind of, everybody's surprise. Nobody expected them to be there, and everyone expected the Niners to roll on them, and they did. And it was great to see. I mean, I love seeing Steve Young get that monkey off his back, and he was joking about it on the sidelines. He was like walking up to people and bending a little bit, saying, "Hey, can you help me get this monkey off my back?" Towards the end of the game, so he was very much aware of it. I've seen interviews with him after the fact that said that he walked back to the hotel because he just wanted to savor the moment. He, stopped by the side of the road and threw up because he was just so overwhelmed with emotion. So it was not a small thing for Steve Young. It was not a small thing for the 49ers, who at this point were being run by Carmen Policy. Walsh was gone completely, and Seifert was the head coach, as you mentioned, and Eddie DeBartolo was still the owner.
Yeah, really, you do kind of have this was the new generation of Niners were finally stepping into their own with that win. What did it do to Steve Young's just local celebrity when he won that?
It cemented it. It really kind of, you could never take that championship away from him. And, it really kind of, few people are Joe Montana's equal. And I guess in the sense that Montana's got 4 titles and Steve Young has 1. He's not Joe Montana's equal, but he's close. And I think that's all he ever wanted was that kind of respect, and not to be considered as the guy that could not ever win the big one. And you could not say that after winning that Super Bowl. You bring up a good point when you mentioned this kind of like new faces. Not all, but a lot of the older faces were gone, and what you had was sort of this new era of 49er, like William Floyd at fullback, who unfortunately had his career shortened by injury, and you had Ricky Waters, who would, before he left to go to the Eagles as a free agent. These were guys who kind of imitated the bad boy behavior, at least on the field, of the Cowboys. And it was sort of like, if you can't beat them, join them. But in this sense, that they joined them in that kind of carefree behavior on the field in order to beat them. And gone were the days where the Niners were sort of like efficient and somewhat, compared to other teams, emotionless. They threw all that aside and kind of joined the modern age, whether you like it or not. And they matched the Cowboys in terms of kind of that bad boy behavior and used it to beat them.
Yeah, and on the sideline of that 94-95 Niners team was Mike Shanahan and his son, right, the current head coach of the Niners, Kyle Shanahan.
Right.
So
right.
One more Super Bowl to go down memory lane on, and we don't need to spend as much time on this one. Super Bowl 47 in New Orleans against the Ravens. This is the only Super Bowl the Niners have lost, known for a lot of different nicknames, that Super Bowl, with John and Jim Harbaugh going against each other, the lights going out in the third quarter. Do you remember watching that Super Bowl when the lights go out? When the lights went out in that Super Bowl, what was going through your mind?
Well, I mean, the Ravens were blowing out the Niners at that point. And then the lights went out, and then as soon as they came back on, the game completely changed. And the Niners came back, and they had the ball, I think, in the red zone, first and goal, with a minute left. And at that point, I think what everyone will regret here in the Bay Area, at least it was from San Francisco fans anyway, is they kind of the Niners tried multiple fades to Michael Crabtree in the corner of the end zone, instead of relying on, at least a couple times, I think everyone thinks they should have gone to Frank Gore, who was tearing up, he was just gashing.
In fairness, they did try to go to LaMichael James first, so I mean.
Okay. Yeah, right. So yeah, I think people wanted them to go to Frank Gore, and they thought that at least might have given them a chance to punch it in. But they kept going to Crabtree with little success, and they came up just short. And that was, of course, the quarterback then was Colin Kaepernick, who had not yet begun kneeling during the national anthem, but it was Jim Harbaugh and Kaepernick, and everyone at that time felt like this team is so young head coach, young quarterback. This team is on the rise and will continue to be on the rise for the next 5 years. And it didn't really work out that way, unfortunately.
Yeah. I mean, speaking about with Harbaugh, I mean, obviously his shadow doesn't really loom over the Niners anymore. I mean, I've definitely kept an eye on his career after he went to Michigan just to see how that would kind of pan out. I mean, I remember at the time letting Harbaugh go seemed like a dumb idea. In hindsight,
Yeah.
clearly it all worked out. What are the differences you've noticed between, Harbaugh coaching the Niners versus Kyle Shanahan coaching the Niners?
Well, I think that was the complaint about Colin Kaepernick. And again, this is before any of the kneeling issues or that kind of stuff. The complaint about Kaepernick was that he was beginning to mimic kind of the disdain for the press that Harbaugh would display. And I knew plenty of Niner fans at the time who said, "I love Harbaugh's results, but God, I hate the way he acts." And and some of the players started to kind of behave like him and be snarky with the press. And if you're being snarky with the press, that's kind of, it's not rational. But fans start to see that behavior as being snarky with them, being snarky with the fans themselves, because the press is their window into these guys' lives, these guys' work, at least when they're not playing. So I think Harbaugh just created and probably continues to create just this atmosphere where it's us versus them, and it can be successful in motivating players, but it also seems to just burn everybody out, including fans, quickly. So it's been a long handful of years since Harbaugh left. A lot of losing. The stadium has not been, the coolest scene in the world down there in Levi's at Santa Clara, but all's well that ends well. And right now, they've moved on from Harbaugh. They've got a winning team, and they've got, as you've mentioned before, Sam, a bunch of times, these players are just a lot more likable, and they're likable compared at least to 5 years ago in the Harbaugh era. On and off the field, you don't have guys getting arrested nearly as much, and then just the way they interact with the press and they interact with each other and they interact with fans, they just seem like a more likable, more carefree, more fun, loving group of guys that like to be around each other. And if you do that and you win, as the Warriors showed the last 5 years, you will rule the Bay Area.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about how some of these guys are just so likable. I mean, that really is, I think, one of the best traits about this team, besides their on-field performance, is they're really, you kind of have to dig deep to find any sort of a trace of a bad apple in this group. And I think it really starts with the quarterback, as it does with most teams. But I mean, Jimmy Garoppolo, I mean, he is just kind of perfectly kind of assimilated into that kind of golden boy, figure here in this season.
Yeah, he reminds me a little bit of Joe Namath. I mean, there's a little bit of Joe Montana there, but there's a lot of Joe Namath in the sense that he's a good-looking guy with a ton of charisma, and even when his numbers don't add up well, don't really add up to a great performance, you still feel like he totally commandeered the game. He just seems like the perfect quarterback. And how can you argue with his results? His starting win-loss record is off the charts. Like I said, even I think the other day for the NFC title game, he went 4 for 6. I had
threw like 8 passes or something.
Yeah, I had to triple check that. They completely leaned on the run, and yet you didn't hear him complain about it. You never would have known it unless you really checked the stat sheet. He's just happy to win. He is a born leader, and he stays out of trouble mostly, and he but yet he commandeers all of the respect of that locker room, which is hard to do when you have 52 other egomaniacs that are turning to you for leadership. And then you have George Kittle, who is I think like kind of the heart and soul of the team. The gregarious, fun-loving personality. It's
kind of like almost kind of like maybe the Klay Thompson of the Niners, assuming if Richard Sherman is the Draymond Green and Garoppolo will be the Steph Curry, and it's crazy how all these players really just kind of sync up with each other. Now you talk about with Garoppolo, it's his leadership ability, and I think that people talk about the lackluster numbers he puts up, but there's so many great things about him that are intangible that can't be quantified. And I think a perfect example is, again, we keep bringing the Raiders into this. Look at Derek Carr, a guy who has clearly all the skills and tools to be a good quarterback, but I think every year it's becoming increasingly increasingly obvious he cannot lead a team. He is not, as they say, a leader of men. And it's why I think you don't see players fall behind him. You got guys in the Niners this year always talking about how awesome Jimmy G is, how fun he is to hang around, how they love being around him, how they'll go to bat for him. Even when the Raiders were good, you didn't have guys really doing that with Derek Carr. I mean, sure, they're always respectful of him, but you don't see guys going out of their way to, effusively praise him like they do, like the Niners do for Garoppolo this year. And yeah, it's small stuff like that when it comes to the ability to lead a team that really, I think, sets Garoppolo, despite his lackluster numbers, apart from a lot of these other great quarterbacks here in the NFL. And then, looking at Kittle, he seems like a super fun guy to hang around. I don't know if you saw it, but around the middle of the season when WWE Raw came to Chase Center, right. Garoppolo and Kittle were spotted sitting behind the broadcaster's booth on TV, and they're goofing off, making faces and stuff like that. Kittle's chugging his beer on camera. It's stuff like that. I mean, that, they call him the people's tight end for a reason, along with the fact that he does a great impersonation of Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the comparisons you made were really apt. Jimmy G as Steph and Kittle as Klay Thompson. Klay Thompson is a lot like that. We're just really a super likable guy who doesn't take himself too seriously, but yet when the game is on the line, he's deeply competitive, fiercely competitive, which is what you want. It's what you want in players, and I love to see the different personalities mesh. You mentioned Sherman as the Draymond. You do need someone who's a little bit willing to talk a little bit and be a little bit crazy. Not too much, but just enough so that the teams don't get the edge. And I think Sherman fills that role. Nick Bosa is having a great rookie year, and there's stuff that he put on social media that personally I'm not crazy about, but it's a free country. And he's free to have political opinions. They're not mine, and I don't think they're the majority of the Bay Area. But he's kept it under wraps since he got drafted, and he continues to play really, really well.
Nothing cures better than winning in that sense. I want to talk about Richard Sherman really quick. If I were to go back, just 3 years ago and tell you that come 2020, Richard Sherman's going to be one of the most beloved athletes in the Bay Area, how crazy of a look would you have given me?
Yeah, I mean, that would have been insane. And just the idea that
he was probably one of the all-time villains, a short 3 years ago, and now he's one of the Bay Area's all-time heroes. Yeah,
it goes to show you how quickly things can change. He's been a leader for this team, and coming back from an Achilles heel injury like that and playing at a really high level, that's almost as rare and almost as unlikely as him becoming a Bay Area hero. So hats off to him.
I hope if he gets a game-sealing interception over Tyreek Hill, he yells about how Tyreek Hill is a sorry, mediocre receiver post-game.
like he did with Crabtree, right?
Yep, it's come full circle. Well, honestly, I mean, talk about full circle. The Harbuagh Niners, you could say that era ended when Richard Sherman caused that interception on Crabtree in the NFC title game back in 2014. And now here we are all these years later, the Niners are going to a Super Bowl because of an interception by Richard Sherman. It's sports, you really you can't script it sometimes, even though it seems like it is.
Yeah, that's the appeal. I think that's why it continues to get great ratings.
So one last player I kind of want to highlight as a guy who really came out of nowhere this year, and that's Raheem Mostert. What's been your thoughts on watching this guy go this year?
Well, he's the team's leading rusher, and just that last game I thought was just such an amazing punctuation mark, an exclamation mark on his season. I mean, he was unstoppable, and it was amazing. I think it was a Tevin Coleman that went down early, and in the game, and it looked like he was going to be the featured back, at least early on. But as soon as he went down, Mostert just stepped up like he's been doing all season long, and he was just amazing. He was a huge part of the game. He's part of the reason why they didn't ask Garoppolo to do much. And when you see a guy that's been cut 6 times, how can you not like that guy? How can you not root for him?
Yeah, I'm looking up. I mean, how many yards he ran for 220 yards, which eclipsed Colin Kaepernick's rushing record that he set against the Packers. I mean, where do you rank that? I mean, Roster's performance: 29 carries, 220 yards, 4 touchdowns. Where do you put that in terms of just all-time Bay Area playoff performances? Because I mean, I got that up there with, Game 6 Clay, what Bumgarner did in the World Series, Sleepy Floyd. I mean, where do you rank that?
Yeah, I mean, for the Niners, it's got Niner running backs, even though they've had some great ones, like Roger Craig, Ricky Waters. You can go down the list. Frank Gore, but that's probably the greatest running back performance in Bay Area history. And then in terms of playoff performances, like you said, it's in the it's on the short list of just amazing performances in the playoffs. I'm trying to, I think the ones that you mentioned are among them. You got Dave,
it's
Dave
hard to think of anything else
with the A's, and you guys. I'm sure there's some Plunkett and Stabler performances in Oakland or at the Coliseum, but yeah, it would be hard to beat.
Yeah, and then just considering, I mean, his story. I remember watching last year. Raiders Niners on Thursday night at Levi's when he went down and you saw his arm almost just literally snap in half. One of the more, brutal injuries I've ever seen happen on a football field. And I mean, you can't even tell now watching him run and play. It's the comeback story is definitely real there. So I want to talk about Kyle Shanahan a little bit more.
Okay.
So the last time we saw Shanahan on the big stage, he was up 28-3 in the Super Bowl against Tom Brady and the Falcons. Do you think he runs the ball a little bit more this time if he gets a similar size lead?
I'm sure he learned his lesson. I remember that they were on the 29-yard line and up by 8 with a few minutes left, and all they had to do really was just run the ball 3 times and then kick a field goal, and the game's over. And of course, I think they got sacked out of field goal range, and the rest is history. The Patriots came back. I'm sure there's a lot of that going through his head, and the challenge for him is going to be just to kind of put all that aside and treat this like its own entity, and be as aggressive as he normally is, and just to try and stay in the moment.
I mean, there was a lot of question marks when he came in with that hire. I mean, there was the whole, obviously, the Super Bowl thing. He was considered, that guy who knows, everything about anything, and he has all the answers. And so there's definitely a lot of potential for this to kind of go off the rails, and credit the Niners for not letting that happen. I guess one last guy I kind of want to touch on really quick, someone who's been, in the background for the most part, Jed York. We saw at the NFC title game when Mike Shanahan handed the trophy over, he stepped aside and let Kyle receive it instead of Jed doing it, which usually the owners are the ones who accept the trophies. I remember after the firing of Chip Kelly, watching Jed York's press conference, and probably one of the most brutal press conferences I've seen in Bay Area history, and there's a lot of them, where you saw the entire Bay Area media just going hard after Jed. I'll always remember Lowell Cohen, snapping at Jed, say something, to show that you're in any way, shape, or form aware of what's going on here. Talk about that comeback that Jed's kind of had now in the public eye, or his ability to stay out of it.
I think it's very smart of him to stay in the background. Nobody really cares about an owner in the sense that, like they're angry with them when they're cheap or when they're not, yielding success. But really, nobody really wants to see an owner, anytime it's good or bad. And I think that Jed learned that the hard way. I mean, he had the Harbuagh firing, which was badly mishandled, and then the Jim Tomsula hiring, which was also badly mishandled, and that press conference, which was almost an hour long, and just
it's very hard to watch.
Yeah, that was a train wreck. And then the season that followed was no surprise. It was equally tough to watch, and then you had the Chip Kelly debacle. So I think he's learned the hard way that good owners stay in the background, and they provide a successful framework for a GM and a coach, and their job is to hire the right people and then get the hell out of the way. And
just shut up and cut the check.
Yeah, and that's what he's done. And then, over time, if you enjoy enough success, you can kind of come out behind the curtain. But he's not there yet. But you know what? To his credit, they're getting closer.
So, let's talk. We spent a lot of time talking about the Niners. Now let's talk about the team they're playing this Sunday, the Kansas City Chiefs. And everyone, for me personally, the thing that sticks out to me with this Chiefs team is the speed that these guys have.
Yeah.
You got a guy in Mecole Hardman who had the 7th and 10th fastest plays this year, both clocked over 21 miles an hour. Though, fun fact, Matt Breida, the fastest runner all year when he had that 83-yard touchdown against the Browns. Sammy Watkins, also one of the fastest runners this year. Tyreek Hill, though, he's got to be the fastest. He's at Cheetah on Twitter. That's how you know he's fast. Their lead running back, Damian Williams, he ran a 4.4 at the combine. These guys on the Chiefs, they can run.
Yeah. If they're going to win this game, and I do think the Niners are going to win this game, but if the Chiefs do win it, it's going to be because I think Pat Mahomes and those speedsters that you mentioned just kind of play out of their minds, which they can do. They're that good.
Yeah. Mahomes especially.
Yeah, and it's funny, and again, I know that Niner fans are listening to this. I don't want to talk about the Raiders too much, particularly because they've left and backstabbed the East Bay. But that's for another show. Sam. I grew up for many years hating the Kansas City Chiefs. But there's nobody on this Chiefs team that I dislike, and I kind of like watching them, and I like them. I like Andy Reid as a coach, even though people criticize him sometimes historically for mangling clock management. But how can you argue his success? He's took the Eagles to the Super Bowl. He's taken the Chiefs to the Super Bowl now.
He's kind of got that unfortunate, kind of monkey on his back, kind of like, I guess, what Steve Young used to have, where he's great, but,
Right.
And then, I guess, of course, Pat Mahomes, he is the centerpiece of the Chiefs. MVP last year, arguably had a better season this year. Here's a stat that I kind of stumbled across that I think really just captures how great Mahomes is. On throws of more than 20 yards, he has a 117 QBR rating on throws that deep. When he goes deep, he is money. And that is something the Niners, I think, are definitely going to have to really work on this year, on Sunday, is making sure that they can really get that pass rush. Don't let him get the time so his receivers can get open downfield. Because if you let a guy like Tyreek Hill or Mecole Hardman get behind you and they have daylight, you're going to be in big trouble.
Yeah, no, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think it's gonna come down to the pass rush. And the good news, if you're a Niner fan, the good news for the 49ers is that that pass rush is their defensive strength. And they've been, it's like a jailbreak on so many plays. And like I said on the outset, it feels sometimes like they've got 14 or 15 guys on the field because they're just everywhere. It feels like
it's tenacious. They're physical, and hopefully, you're going to need to see a lot of Bosa chasing Mahomes around on Sunday. And again, Mahomes MVP last year. He's killing on the deep ball this year. He had a 90.7 QBR quarterback rating on 20-yard throws last year. So, he really is just better across the board almost this year. And he's probably not going to win the MVP because Lamar Jackson will probably get it. And that's not to take away from Mahomes' still excellent season. He would be a back-to-back winner if it weren't for Lamar Jackson's stunning season. This kid, he's going to be fun to watch for a very long time in Kansas City.
Yeah, and he is as likable or even more than a lot of the really likable Niners we mentioned today. He's just he seems like such a good dude, and as far as we see them, but he just seems like a really likable guy, and just someone that I'm always kind of thrilled to watch, but also root for. He's just he and Andy Reid both, and he's also the leading rusher on the team. So he can hurt you in a number of ways. Although I do think the Niners are going to win the game.
Yeah. All right. And then we don't have to get too much into him, but one of the guys guys on the Chiefs defense who we'll be seeing again is, in fact, Terrell Suggs, who, played such a big role in that last Niners Super Bowl appearance. My little fun Terrell Suggs story was back in 2015, the day I graduated from college at the University of Miami. My family went out to dinner on South Beach that night at this Cuban restaurant. And as we're eating dinner, this, party comes in of, all these guys and this one really big looking dude who, what do you know, it was Terrell Suggs eating at the same restaurant that I was on the night that I graduated. So I didn't go up and say anything to him because I'm not the kind of person to bother someone when they're eating dinner, but it was just, wow, of all the guys to walk in, Terrell Suggs.
Yeah.
So before we kind of wrap up with our picks here, I just want to kind of looking back this season, just kind of looking ahead as well. How sustainable do you think this is for the Niners? And would it be a disappointment if the Niners don't win it this year?
Oh, I think it always hurts. I don't know. Would it be a disappointment? Sure, in the sense that it's really it's always just kind of painful to lose a Super Bowl. You came so close, and there's so much buildup for it. It can be very, very tough to even come back from that. But I think to answer your first question, so it'll be somewhat disappointing. But I think that they're so young. They are built to last for at least the next 5 years. So that's what makes this a really, really exciting team for the Bay Area, for San Francisco, is that, Quan Alexander, 25, Dre Greenlaw, 22, Fred Warner, 23. Those are just the linebackers, Emmanuel Mosley, who's come on this year, is 23. Jaquiski Tartt is the old man, and at 27, Jimmy Ward, 28. Everyone else except for Sherman's 31. But there's a lot of guys on that defense that are really young, both sides of the ball, really. So this team for the next 5 years is stacked, and it'll just be a question of they'll win at least one Super Bowl. The question is, how many?
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. The NFL, unless you're kind of a team like the Patriots or the Steelers or the Packers, the windows, they open and close so quickly these days. So I think if you have the opportunity like the Niners do now, you just have to seize it. Especially looking ahead next year. This seems like a lousy time to think about next year, but we're going to do it anyway. Yeah. It's a doozy of a schedule. They got the Niners have to play the NFC East and the AFC East. You have road games in Dallas, 2 road games in New York. You got to go back to New Orleans. You have to go to New England. Your home slate's, though, pretty easy. Miami, Buffalo, Green Bay, Washington, Philly. And then you still have 6 games against arguably the best division in the NFL right now. So, and no one's going to be taking the Niners. Niners aren't going to be taking anybody by surprise next year when the season starts. So, I think it's I personally think it'll be a pretty disappointing development if they don't win on Sunday, just because the opportunity is just so there for the taking. Whereas you look at, maybe that last Super Bowl in New Orleans against the Ravens, it really could have gone either way because the teams, look so evenly matched. But here it just seems like you have such an amazing opportunity here to seize this Super Bowl that you kind of just have to win it. So
you make a good point. You make a great point because I could have said the same thing, and I kind of did about the Colin Kaepernick, Jim Harbaugh 49ers. That team looked like it was ready to contend for a Super Bowl for the next 3 to 5 years, and unfortunately they did not. So
it's a brutal league that we're in.
Yeah.
So let's wrap things up here. We've gone almost an hour. What's your final score pick?
I think it'll be 34-26, the Niners, and it'll be one of those games where the last touchdown was meaningless. So the game won't be that close, really. But 34-26, SF.
I'm gonna somewhat agree with you. I'm going Niners 38, Chiefs 32. I think the Niners defense is just gonna shut down the running game and force Pat Mahomes to win it, and he's gonna have to throw the ball a lot. And I just don't think he will be able to carry the whole team against this defense like he's been able to in the past. So
yeah.
Also, fun fact, so this is the Niners' 7th Super Bowl appearance. This is the first time they are the underdogs in the Super Bowl. They are 1-point underdogs right now. And it's the first time that they have ever been underdogs.
That's amazing.
So, well, anyway, Chris, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. Where are you going to be watching the game?
I am on the East Coast right now, so I'll be watching the game probably at a sports bar near Times Square, and just kind of doing that.
Awesome. Well, thanks a ton for coming on. If for all those listening, if you want to see more of Chris's work, we'll link up his past episode in the description where we talked about the history of East Bay sports. You can read more of his stuff through the East Bay Express. Follow him. Chris, what's your Twitter handle again?
At C DeBenedetti. That's CDEBENEDETTI.
Awesome. All right. Thanks a lot, Chris, and go Niners.
Thanks, Sam. Take care.